going to show you 3 ways that you can use to reinforce stained glass using copper strip. Hi, it's David in the stained glass studio, and I'm hoping that you're going to love this video. Now we're going to cover 3 methods that we've used to reinforce stained glass, and we're going to be using this. This is called re-strip, and it's a very thin strip. At the end of this video, I said I'm going to show you 3 different ways to reinforce it, and there will be a bonus at the end of the video. So we recommend that windows which exceed 3 foot by 4 foot inside be reinforced to prevent breakage. If a window is 3 foot by 3 foot, like I said, it might not need to be reinforced, and that's usually a judgment call based on where it's to be installed or the design of the window itself. Now, in the old days, when a panel was large and needed to be reinforced, artists actually installed big pieces of rebar, no kidding, rebar, in window frames and wired the stained glass to the rebar. This was an effective method of reinforcement, but it was far from attractive. Now, I'm not complaining, but doesn't the art of stained glass have enough restrictions already? Are you telling me that I'm going to have to work my beautiful design around chunks of concrete reinforcement? Fortunately, there's something fairly new on the scene to help us in that area. The secret? A thin strip of copper which is thin enough to fit between existing lead lines. Restrip. You solder them in place and you've got a substantially stronger panel. How can this be? It's so thin and floppy. See how easily it bends? That's part of what's so cool about this strip of copper. It bends easily in one direction, allowing us to follow the most meandering lead lines, but it's fairly rigid in the other direction, adding the strength to the glass. Before this new copper strip was available, we used to have to go to the sheet metal shop and have them cut 1/4 inch wide strips of thin gauge copper on the shear. Then we had to bend it to follow our lead lines using needle nose pliers. It was fairly complex, and when done, you still had a piece of copper that stood 1/4 inch proud above the surface of the window. Sometimes it cast a shadow on the panel, and soldering the back was a challenge as well. When reinforcing a window using this or any other method, it's important to remember that the reinforcement must run from one side of the window to the other to do any good. If a piece of copper is run to the middle and then it just stops, you will actually be creating a place where more stress will be applied to that spot, and the window could break there. The copper strip comes in a roll and will cover a lot of glass. The idea is to run the copper back and forth along lead lines so the glass will have more strength than it did before. And it'll transfer the stresses on it to its outer edge, where it's stronger since it's installed in some sort of rugged framework, be it metal outer bar or woodwork. This will prevent the glass from getting cracks, either from being pushed on or from the weight of the glass being pulled down by gravity over time and sagging. Now, this panel is so large that we need to reinforce it a great deal. I began by running strips up and down the length of the window. I used some spray cans, which were handy to weigh the strip down in between the glass. Make sure if you use this method to remove the cans before soldering, because heat and pressurized cans can be hazardous. At places where the copper strip intersects another piece of copper, I have to cut the new piece so I can continue on across the panel. I bend a little L shape on the end of the copper so that it won't slide as I install it, and then I gently press it in between the glass, the foil, and the other copper strips. I use something to weight it down, like those spray cans, or it'll pop out from between the glass. I then string the copper out to the edge of the panel. When doing this, I keep the roll of copper in the bag it came in and gently pull it out as I need it. I use care not to let it tangle or slip out of the bag so I don't have to relive the disaster with my slinky when I was a kid. I use tin snips to cut the copper about 1/4 inch from the edge of the glass. With all the reinforcement strips in place, I begin to tack the glass together. I make sure that the glass is pushed into the right place on the pattern. The copper has a tendency to push things around. On this picture, arrows point to all the places where copper has been installed to properly reinforce this panel. After soldering the panel, I need to clean up the areas where copper extends beyond the edges. Using the tip of my soldering iron, I push the copper strip over the edge, which bends it. Holding the strip in place with needle nose pliers, I solder the copper against the edge of the foil. When it's done, you can't even tell that the window's been reinforced. Since this panel is then going to be installed in a door, once it's soldered, it gets sent out to be encased in tempered glass and insulated. The tempered glass adds an additional amount of strength to the panel. Woohoo! Man, that was a long discussion, wasn't it? Well, that was the first way that we talk about reinforcing a window. That was the first and most normal one, and so I had to give you all the details. Now, I'm not going to have to go over near as much on this next part. This is how to aggressively reinforce a window. Now, you know, we try to encourage designs that are not only beautiful, but practical as well. And occasionally a client wants something that challenges us, and we need to add additional reinforcing to strengthen the window. Now, this window only had 3 lines which continued across the panel from one side to the other. So I determined that I would have to build it with 2 pieces of copper stripping instead of 1. Now, it was difficult to get 2 pieces of copper between the glass. Maybe you can see in the photo that there are 2 strips going in each direction. And then you can see that this design is very simple. You can also see that if we were to put reinforcing across the lines that don't extend across the panel, they would create stress points where the glass might tend to break. Now, here at the edge, you can see both pieces of copper. When I solder these pieces, the copper strips cause the solder to wick down into the channel. So with the strips in place, the lead line is stronger because the copper resists bending back and forth, and the additional solder provides more anchoring to the strip and the copper foil that surrounds the glass. And so now I can turn the panel over, you know, by following the same directions that I've shown on handling glass. Here's a photo of the panel complete and ready for installation. I gave a client a board that was the same size as the glass so the panel would have additional support as it was shipped home. Once the window was installed, it was much stronger since it supported all the way around. I still worry that the design is very weak, but I feel better knowing that I've added as much support as possible. Now the client sent me a picture of the finished window, and here it is, smiling at us near her kitchen sink. Okay, that was the second way of aggressively reinforcing a window. First we did the regular, then we did aggressive, and now I'm going to walk you over to show you another method. Now this window obviously is not bigger than 3 feet. It's taller than 3 feet, but it's not wider than 3 feet. So why did I need to reinforce it? Well, I really didn't know that I needed to reinforce it until I got the first side soldered. And then I discovered that these many different pieces made the window kind of wobbly. And so it wasn't strong. So I realized that I needed to reinforce it. Well, too late. I already had this side soldered. And so what I had to do was I took these pieces of re-strip and laid them up on top of the solder joints and soldered them in place. So I've got a ring here, and I've got a piece coming across to this ring, and I've got one coming down over to this side, and I've got one here coming over to this side, and that strengthened the window so that it wasn't gonna, fall out of the space. Okay, here's that bonus feature that I promised you. Now remember, first we did regular re-strip, then we did more aggressively, we added the re-strip, and then we added it on top of the solder line. So those are the 3 different methods that we've talked about. Now then, this is not copper and it's not re-strip. This is about a 1/2 inch piece of galvanized metal. Now what I did was I knew that I needed some reinforcing, so I went over to a sheet metal shop and had them cut a bunch of 1/2 inch strips for me. And here's a little clip of me showing how we use this type in a skylight. Now you've got to really reinforce glass that's hanging flat so that it won't sag. And this stuff is stout, it's thick, and it really did the job. So those are the different methods that we have used, and I hope that this has been instructive for you. If you'll do me a favor, subscribe to our channel, click on the bell, and tell your friends about us too. Thanks.